Welcome to this episode of Locked In. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the actual features of possibly your next endurance, all-road, or mild gravel bike that you should actually consider when purchasing new, used, building from the frame up, or anything else that I want to discuss in this video because there's so many bikes out there and companies that are feeding us features that I don't think are relevant, especially when it comes to fit and everything else when you're actually considering your next bike in any of those categories. This video is not going to be all about racing. It's going to be about you being comfortable and having a bike that's actually going to fit your needs, not possibly the agenda that's pushing through certain advertisements. But you can always fight me in the comments below if you want. Make sure to subscribe and let's get on a quick ride and discuss these key points that I think are important for your next bike build. All right, so the big thing is first off, I feel like endurance and all-road have kind of melded together. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. But a little quick history lesson before we get into the components of the bike. As most know, road bikes used to be max tire size 28C with rim brake. Went to disc brake, still was that way, and now we're pretty much settled on even road race frames carry a 32. And then you had your endurance bikes, which were more upright on the stack, shorter reach, and when the disc brakes came out, 32, maybe a 35 was what you'd expect as a comfort bike. But now, if you look at most endurance bikes, there's plenty of them out there that stated they clear a 40, which typically means in dry conditions you can put a 42 measured on there, no problem, possibly a 44, 45, because most endurance bikes will also have mudguard mounts, also known as fenders. And so that's where all-road kind of filled in that gap for the first part, typically clearing a 40, maybe a 42. And that's where my bike sits in at, as the Cobalt Marauder All-Road is what we called it. And it's a stated 42 clearance. I could probably sneak a 45. In California, it's relatively dry. So that begs the question, first, is endurance and all-road basically kind of the same thing now? I think it basically is, to be honest, with very subtle geometry tweaks for off-roading, mainly on the all-road. But there's plenty of endurance bikes that are totally gravel capable for most people. So that gets me into, realistically, what do you need in a new bike? Road, all-road, or gravel for most riders. And I think having something that sits with these features can make a very versatile bike with very little compromises, unlike what I've done in the past in making my gravel bike also a road bike. There's definitely pros and cons to that setup, but I think this kind of gets this perfect happy medium that I think works super well for most people. So let's get into my top 5 things I think are the most important things to consider when you're getting a new bike. First off, you want to be honest with yourself. And why I say that is, yes, I would love to be super flexible, fast, and ultra fit and tear it up on a super aggressive geometry race bike. But that's not me, and that's not most people. Now, does that mean that road bikes are stupid? Absolutely not. I love a good racy bike every once in a while, and I've had plenty in the past. But for most cyclists, if you look at them on their road bikes, they have a ton of spacers on there, which is not a bad thing to have, but it just shows that they aren't flexible enough to properly fit that bike, and typically would enjoy something with a taller stack height, which means a taller head tube and taller handlebar position. So being realistic with yourself is the first thing I would say. And for most people, especially when I've done fits, I fit for comfort, which typically means that you're gonna be more comfortable, which means you can put out power for longer. So being aspirational, yes, we all wanna get in better shape, be healthier, all those kind of things. That doesn't determine or change what kind of bike you want. But think about something that actually fits you very well, first off, before deciding what category of bike you really wanna get into. But regardless of that category, comfort should be key. And that's why typically endurance bikes or all-road or gravel bikes fit the majority of people easier because of the taller stack and shorter reach, meaning that you don't have to be ultra yoga fold in half flexible to fit the bike, which typically means you're going to be more comfortable and want to go out and ride more often. And that gets me into my next point, which is tire size. As I already explained, most endurance bikes now, and let's say fast gravel or all-road bikes, clear a lot more tire than they did in the first generation or two of them by now, since the gravel category has gotten popular. And I would definitely recommend for most people to get something that clears at least a 35, but if it can clear a 40 comfortably, that means you have a plethora of either big road slicks like I'm running. These are the new Panaracer slicks with their new compound. I'll be doing a review later on these, so make sure to subscribe. Or you can do a variety of gravel tires from mild to wild in that 40C size, because most companies make a gravel tire in that size. So you want to have a variety, and to be honest, the handling difference with the longer wheelbase and things for most people isn't going to be that big of an issue. And the other benefit is if you have a bike that clears a bigger tire and toe overlap is a big problem for you, which if you don't know is when you're clipped in and your tire could potentially hit your toe when you're turning a tight radius. Having a bike with larger tire clearance typically means if you run a slightly undersized tire, you'll have more clearance to negate toe overlap, and that's especially important for smaller riders, typically 52 centimeter frames and under. That can be a problem, especially with a larger tire bike, so keep that in mind. Next is going to be staying away from cable integration. And that means when the cables run through the stem or the handlebars into the frame in some type of configuration. Every brand seems to be doing their own version of that. But to be honest, for most people, that's going to be a big expense whenever you need to change the fit or setup or stem length or bar angle. It looks really, really rad. Don't get me wrong, but this is so much simpler. Yes, it is less aero, but it is so much easier to service the bike. And on this bike, since it is wireless access group set, I do have ports for running mechanical cables, but I have some rubber plugs just for a cleaner aesthetic. But this type of bike is so much easier to swap stems on, change bar angle, and actually work on yourself instead of having to pay hundreds of dollars to recable the bike anytime you want to do any major changes to your cockpit. There are some bikes out there that allow you to choose between if you want to do semi-integrated, which is kind of a middle compromise between the two, but consider that for the future of your bike. More and more bikes are coming integrated, so finding something that is more traditional is definitely harder, but there are bikes out there. But you may have to look to something that is not from a major manufacturer like the big three, Giant, Trek, or Specialized. After that, it's going to be standard component sizes. This is where your traditional round seat post in a 27.2 or whatever variety of sizes is going to make it easier for aftermarket options to change components out, to upgrade components, and to get the bike to fit you if you need a certain setup, setback seat post, inline, stem length, things like that, to where your stem is a standard 1.1 to a 31.8 clamp. Now, obviously, there's a few frames that use a different steer tube size, but even those typically will have a variety of options, so you're not pigeonholed into only using proprietary parts, because that does limit you in some capacity. Maybe not initially, but eventually, trust me, I would know it does. So any componentry that you can do that's standardized, I would say round seat post, regular bar and stem combo, as well as a standardized bottom bracket, typically something threaded, either BSA, which is your standard go-to, or the newer standard of T47 threaded. Makes it way easier as far as bottom bracket setup, and something that you can remove and service at home. Again, saving you money and time for later. Now, that being said, I do take my bike to the bike shop for wheel truing and brake bleeding because those two things elude me, but it saves me on expense for basic maintenance or cleaning. Now, the last thing to consider, depending on the style of bike that you get, is being realistic with the gear ratios that are offered on the bike or what you want to do with the bike. Now, I'm not going to get into a super debate about 1x versus 2x, but I will mention a few standout contenders for that reason and my setup and why I set it up the way I have. And just for background, all my bikes currently are all 1x. Now, I'm not knocking 2x drivetrains. They're great for certain situations, and depending what category of bike you're going into, that might be better suited for you because of the smaller jumps between gears, and there are a lot of affordable group sets now that have a wider range of gears than your SRAM or Shimano group sets are going to in a 2x configuration. I'm going to give a quick shout out to Microsoft Micro Shift Sword in a 9 or a 10 speed configuration because they have a great compact chainring set with a wide range 11 to 38 rear cassette, which gives you way more climbing gear than SRAM or Shimano's offerings, which are also more expensive. So that being said, if you're running a 2x system, if the cranks come with a standard 50-34 chainring set, so see in the brand that you have on the bike, if you can get a chainring set for it to run down to a 46-32 or a 44-30, that gives you way more climbing gear in the standard configuration with the rear cassette, because typically on these style of bikes, the rear cassette is as big as the manufacturer allows for the rear derailleur without any modifications. Now, if you're going 1x, this is the setup that I have, and I'll give you the reason why real quick. So I have a SRAM XD driver rear hub body on these light bicycle wheels, which are ultralight, and I have a review, which I'll link in the description below. But this allows me to run this cassette, which is a Zito 9-46 cassette. The reason that's important is because of the 9 tooth, and I paired that with a 42 front chain ring. Typically, most gravel bikes nowadays will come with a 40 or 42. I think this is perfect for all road, for road riding, as well as light duty gravel, as long as I'm not fully loaded on the bike. But what this allows me to do is typically, just for easy number's sake, most rear cassettes on most 2x group sets are going to have a 34 in the back and typically paired with a 34 in the front, meaning you have a 1-to-1 ratio. Now with this 42 and a 46, Obviously, having the bigger rear cassette gives me a substantially easier climbing gear than a standard 2x group set. And on the other end of it, because I have that 9 instead of the 11, the 9 tooth being 2 teeth smaller in the back is effectively like having 6 teeth bigger in the front, which means that this 42 is going to feel like a 48-11. And that's really, really close to a 50-11, which is a standard biggest ring, fastest gear ratio you're going to get on most 2x systems. So in my head, this does it pretty well. Obviously, there's bigger gaps than your 2x setup, but that was my ethos of getting a better climbing range with similar top end, because for me, I would rather have climbing gear, but I could do it the other direction, going bigger on the chainring if needed, if I wanted more top speed. So comment below if you bought a bike with all these features already built in and you thought about this before purchasing your new bike. And if not, let me know if these were helpful, or if you have any other tips that I didn't include in the comments below. I'll thumbs up and like any of those to make sure that every other viewer can see those. So I hope you like this video. Make sure to comment. Since if you stuck around to the end, I want to say I did have my gallbladder removed, so that did kind of put me on hiatus for the channel to create content, but I'm trying to catch back up. So thanks for watching this episode of Locked In.
Let's get locked into